I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of the other CoSA staff, Executive Director Ann Ackerson, and Program Consultant, IT Consultant, Becky Julson. We're going to be starting in just a few minutes, but before we get started, I just want to remind you of a couple of housekeeping items that we'd like for you to keep in mind during the webinar. If you would use the chat box for any questions, or if you have any technical issues or any other communications, we would appreciate it if you'd use the chat box. It's over to the right of the screen and also in a bubble up at the top on the ribbon. If you use the chat box, that ensures that the staff and the presenters are able to see your chat. If you use the Q&A box, sometimes it gets lost because it just goes to the presenters and it's a little squirrely, so if you use the chat box to communicate with us, we'd appreciate it. We're also going to use the chat box during the Q&A period after the speakers are finished, so just keep that in mind as well. But we're very happy to have you here today, and I'm going to turn the program over to our moderator for today, Alan Ramsey at the Connecticut State Library. Alan is the Connecticut Deputy State Archivist, and he's active in many CoSA committees and much CoSA work, especially through the State Electronic Records Initiative. Alan is co-chair of Series Tools and Resources Subcommittee. On behalf of CoSA, I'm pleased to welcome Alan as our moderator today. Alan?
Thank you, Barbara. And first, I would like to start off with a special announcement. I would like to introduce Tim Baker, Maryland State Archivist and President of the Council of State Archivists.
Thank you, Alan. I'm Tim Baker from the Maryland State Archives. I'm really very pleased to be with you today. And if I can ask Becky to move to the third to the last slide, please. I have a special announcement I'd like to make as we're getting started here. Many of you may not know or may not be aware that our great CoSA Executive Director, Ann Ackerson, is leaving us at the end of this year to pursue a number of her longtime interests. She's been very instrumental in many of these webinars, and so you may recognize her from these fine presentations. In addition, in her time with us, she's amassed many accomplishments, and I'd like to just name a few. She has, in her time with us, improved our strategic planning and board development. She's improved our annual workshops and our board and board committee apparatus, very much strengthening the organization. We've enjoyed stable fiscal management. We've increased our number of corporate sponsors and donations. She's continued the success of CoSA grant-funded projects. Can you move to the next slide, please, Becky? In continuing these grant-funded projects include our two IMLS grants during her tenure, the Access Planning Grant, and this year our Access Implementation Grant. And finally, I'd just like to mention the recent creation and adoption of CoSA's long-term sustainability plan. We wouldn't have been able to pull that together without Ann and her leadership. In short, Ann's been with us through what I feel are some of the most impactful years of CoSA's existence, and we just want to wish her well as she explores new opportunities as an author, as a consultant, and just as a good and competent manager. So next slide, please, Becky. So thank you, Ann. I really appreciate it.
Why, thank you, Tim. What a surprise. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your very kind words and these pictures. My God, where did you get them? Burn them.
I didn't dig them up.
Well, I just want to, in all seriousness, thank you, Tim, and the board of directors and the many members. You're a terrific group to be a part of, and I'm so glad that I've had the opportunity for these 5 years to be a part of your world and to help CoSA and hopefully move CoSA forward to the next phase of its growth and development. This is a terrific organization. I've always been so impressed with the level of interest and involvement from our membership. It's just extraordinary, and I will take that with me wherever I go. So it's been a rewarding 5 years for me, and I'm very, very honored to have had the opportunity to work with all of you, and hope that I am able to maintain many of your friendships going forward. So thank you so much, Tim. This was a lovely surprise.
No doubt. Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it back to Alan, our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to talk about managing the unexpected, and our today's speakers are Lizette Pelletier from Connecticut and Chelle Somsen from South Dakota. Lizette Pelletier is the Connecticut State Archivist with the Connecticut State Library. She has held a position since 2014. She serves as a State Historical Records Coordinator for the State Historical Records Advisory Board. Prior to becoming a State Archivist, she served for 10 years as a Records Management Analyst with the Office of Public Records Administrator, and 10 years as the Assistant State Archivist. She is a member of the Council State Archivist Board and Chair of the Development Committee. And then I just want to introduce Chelle Somsen, our other speaker today. Chelle Somsen is a South Dakota State Archivist with the South Dakota State Historical Society State Archives, which is a division under the South Dakota Department of Education. She's been the State Archivist for 12 years. Somsen is the Chair of the South Dakota State Historical Records Advisory Board, an alumni of the Archives Leadership Institute, and a member of the American Institute for Conservation National Heritage Responders. She is a member of the Council State Archivist Board, Chair of the Education and Training Committee, and a member of the State Electronic Records Initiative Steering Committee. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lizette so she can talk about managing the unexpected.
Thank you very much, Alan. All right, it's always exciting to receive that official letter from a granting agency notifying you that all your hard work has paid off and you've been awarded funding for that project you designed with such care. You have your performance objectives and your timeline, so now you can roll up your sleeves, get to work, and change historiography by making that key document accessible or inspiring that Nacian historian. Writing the grant, submitting it through grants.gov or whatever system was required, and waiting for the decision was the hard part. It's clear sailing from here, or so you think. We all work in a bureaucracy, and if this is your first grant, you're going to quickly learn that a bureaucracy is a, quote, system of administration distinguished by 1, its clear hierarchy of authority, 2, rigid division of labor, 3, written and mostly inflexible rules, regulations and procedure, and 4, mostly impersonal relationships. Now, we all know that stuff happens, but just when you think you're prepared for every possible eventuality, along comes Murphy. I've been a project archivist, assistant grant director, or grant director on 7 federally funded grants over the course of my career, as well as serving on the administrative staff for a state-funded grant program. I'm going to discuss some of the unexpected situations and events that I have encountered or have heard about from my colleagues. I've grouped them by category, of course, I'm an archivist, and we'll present the categories in alphabetical order. I will leave it to Chelle to discuss how you might deal with some situations like this, but you will see that sometimes all you can do is keep calm and carry on. Unexpected financial issues, in my experience, are for the most part not directly related to the grant itself, but can impact a grant project or programs in multiple ways. Connecticut is known as the land of steady habits, and for as long as I've been a state employee here, Connecticut has habitually been in a state of fiscal crisis, even if the rest of the economy is rolling along nicely. The most immediate impact for me as a grant recipient or a grant administrator is the hiring freeze, regardless of the funding source. This can include temporary project personnel, consultants, or that you've creating personal service agreements for. And it may or may not be a hard freeze, but it usually translates into 2 to 10 additional steps to justify filling a grant-funded position. And then there can just be other things that occur with the fiscal office. My latest surprise is that my my fiscal administrative officer has informed me that we have $700 left over from a federal grant that closed on September 30th. Where the $700 comes from, I know not, because at the end of August, we had agreed that we had accounted for all our expenditures. So that's something I'm going to have to be trying to figure out in the coming weeks. Organizational issues at the state, agency, local, or institutional level can cause unexpected issues for a grant, project, or program. Doing more with less is the mantra of most state and local governments these days. Our current governor is dedicated to lean and efficient government, which has meant major reorganization and consolidation of state services and agencies. In addition to unexpectedly increasing our operational workload due to people moving and relocating, the State Library no longer has its own business office whose staff understands the unique requirements of each grant program. Our business and personnel services are now provided by the state's SMART unit, which stands for Small Agency Resource Team. Due to its own high workload, the SMART staff has an unusually high turnover or burnout rate, which means procedures may unexpectedly change when a new person comes into a position over there. For collaborative grants, we've had situations where one partner's unexpected event has a ripple effect on other partners, especially where it concerns in-kind contributions. We've had to shift time or services from one staff member to another or from one partner to another when one of the partners is not able to provide the time and materials that were originally promised. My experience is that the lag time between application, notification, and implementation of a grant means that available support staff, proposed project personnel, or budget situations may have changed significantly since the project was initially proposed. Grants with a public engagement component can experience the unexpected as well. The Connecticut SHRAB and Conservation Connection Program have collaborated on a series of NHPRC and IMLS grants to assist small emerging institutions or evolving programs that have archival collections in order to educate them in archival best practices and encourage them to implement these practices. This has included a number of workshop series and most recently a traveling archivist program. The State Library has also funded workshops early in our local Historic Documents Preservation Grant Program. Our expectations of our participants don't always align with their reality, even though we thought we knew the audience. The majority of participants in our Best Practices workshop work or volunteer at museums, historic houses, and some for many, many years. We were surprised at the resistance to the concept that archival materials are not handled as individual items either for arrangement or description. Then there was the Planning for Digitization Projects workshop where, despite being carefully described as not a how-to workshop, we got multiple complaints on the evaluations that we didn't tell them how to digitize. The most unusual was the workshop attendee who tried to hijack the group she was in. She kept trying to make everything about her and her institution and collection. Another thing we didn't expect were the people, usually town officials, that we call repeat offenders. They take any workshop we offered multiple times. We think it's an excuse to escape the office because a lot of times they're just sitting there working on their cell phones. Sometimes a good idea goes unexpectedly bad. We supported a consultant to attend the State Library's World War I digitization events to provide information on preserving family documents. Originally proposed as a workshop in conjunction with the event organizer decided that a workshop wasn't a good fit, so the consultant staffed a table instead. The first event had a very low attendance. The second was fairly well attended, but most people didn't stop at the table. The third event was mildly successful when held as a quote-unquote workshop off to the side, and the person was actually making a presentation. Staff turnovers are not unexpected. People retire, move on for career advancement or other reasons. The timing or circumstances can be what's unexpected. One doesn't expect a project consultant to essentially disappear towards the end of the project and fail to complete the assigned work. This costs me a lot of time trying to resolve the issue, including having to request a no-cost extension for the entire grant, deal with the difficult process of attaining additional personal service agreements to reassign the work to the other project consultants because their original contracts had expired. One also doesn't expect an early statewide early retirement offer that results in a cascading shuffle of personnel or job duties inside and outside of the agency, or a project director to suffer a heart attack and then have the project no longer be a priority for him upon his return to work, or another break a fibula in his leg and be out on medical leave for 5 months. And worst of all was the unexpected deaths of key project personnel, including a project director on one federal grant or the agency's fiscal liaison officer, all of which we had to work around. Please note that as project director on our NHPRC board grants, I do not believe in jinxes or curses. Excuse me a minute while I retrieve my lucky rabbit's foot. For a state-funded grant program such as our local Historic Documents Preservation Grant Program, the legislature unexpectedly swept, quote-unquote, excess funds from our dedicated account to balance the budget at the end of the 2009 fiscal year, something that the program still hasn't recovered from. Recently, the legislature included an increase to the amount of the dedicated fee that funds the program, but the governor's proposed budget threatened to divert the increase to the general fund before it even got deposited into the account. As of this morning in the budget that passed, it looks like we're getting the increase for the fund. So that was a pleasant, unexpected development. Shortly after his 2002 election to a third term as governor, John G. Rowland, facing a growing state budget deficit, ordered the layoff of 2,300 state employees when the unions were only able to find a little more than $900 million of the $1 billion in concessions he had demanded. The layoffs were based on union imposition, not on economic need. Temporary grant positions were targeted as well. The State Library had just initiated an NHPRC-funded court records project. Fortunately, NHPRC worked with the State Library, and the project eventually was completed after being on hold for quite a while. Just to note that the resulting lawsuits filed by the state unions were finally settled 2 years ago when the current administration realized the state could lose up as much as $340 million if it was the courts ruled against them. As I mentioned before, events that occur between the lag time between application, notification, and implementation can impact a grant project even before it begins. Especially for our NHPRC board grants, which often continue activities over an extended period, lessons learned during a previous grant result in changes to the next grant's work plan because the application is submitted before the current grant ends and the final reports are written. Based on our experiences with the first round of best practices workshops, we had to adjust the roundtables, which we had proposed for the next grant, because there was a subgroup of participants who required additional training in the most rudimentary archival concepts and weren't ready for more advanced topics. Technology has become so ingrained into our lives that we no longer expect to have technological issues other than the usual things that go wrong regarding compatibility between software versions or the extension cord that isn't long enough. However, after confirming a host site, with a host site that they had a computer and projector, our speaker arrived only to find that none of the staff at the site knew how to work the equipment and that they didn't have the proper cables to connect the two devices. Fortunately, our speaker had decided at the last minute to bring along her personal laptop, and after a bit of delay to the start of the program, she was able to give her presentation. Another unexpected technological impact we've had to deal with was the unintended consequences after new software or systems are implemented at the state level or existing ones are upgraded, and this is especially true for the state accounting system. So reports that we got under the old system, we aren't able to get under the new system, and that can impact trying to figure out where you're at in the grant project. Winter weather, especially snowstorms in New England, are not unexpected. However, having a snowstorm occur on the original date, the planned snow date, and the snow date for the third installment of Getting Your Archives in Order workshop series was totally unexpected. Fortunately, the pattern of snowstorms didn't carry into April that year. So weather can be an unexpected factor. Now, not all unexpected things on your grant are negative. Our SHRAB board members have stepped up to serve as instructors or host sites during the original Archives Best Practices workshops, and they saved us a significant amount of money. With those extra funds and a little smart shopping on our part, we were able to create archive starter kits, which the traveling archivists hand out as part of their site visits now. This includes a Hollinger box, some archival folders, a bone folder, spatula, and other archival appropriate materials. In addition, because we didn't have to pay stipends to workshop presenters, we were able to offer a complete second series of the workshops during the grant and double the amount of participants that we were able to reach. The quality of our programs has also made them very popular, and we consistently have more people interested than we can accommodate. So it's an incentive to keep applying for grants. So in conclusion, let me leave you with the grant manager's prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know when to ask for a no-cost extension. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm up. So this is Shelley. I'm with the South Dakota State Archives, and I'm going to kind of go over some of the same things that Lizette talked about and some solutions that worked for us, keeping in mind that everybody's going to be different. Everybody's going to have different variables, different grant situations, and there is no one perfect solution that's going to work for everybody. So these are just ideas. These are things that worked for us. So let's see if I can get it to advance. Okay, so when you have your grant, you've filled out your grant application, you've got your idea, you've got your game plan. You know who the key players are, you've got a budget and a goal, the performance objectives, everything's in place, it's going well, but it just takes that one unexpected thing and you have to readjust and redefine your whole game plan. That can happen at the start of your grant, or can happen anywhere in between. Maybe not getting awarded what you'd asked for, and you have to adjust. Like Lizette said, not even be able to start when you think you're going to be able to start. For us, we had a grant, and we were supposed to be able to hire a grant-funded person, which we did, but then they couldn't start for 3 months because it took them that long to get moved to our state to get started. So what we had to do in the meantime is just readjust our schedule, and some of the full-time staff had to start in on a grant while we waited for that grant-funded person to get started. So it's just, you kind of think you've got it all going, but it just takes one unexpected thing to make you have to readjust. Jumping through the hoops. When you work with state government and federal government agencies, these are just specs. These are things you just have to do, contracts, fiscal requirements, timesheets. You know, those are sometimes expected and anticipated when you start the grant, and you kind of know how much time that's going to take, but you need to kind of budget in more. We had to accommodate for our finance officer who kept track of all of our grant funds, who changed. We had a new person. We had 4 new people within a period of a 1-year grant. And so in order to accommodate that, I built in extra time into my schedule to meet with those people. I had to brief them on the grant. It becomes really tedious, but you've got to kind of think ahead of time and kind of get that budgeted into your grant as far as, and it really kind of helps out in the end with match as far as time and making those connections with those financial people, because they're the ones that have to help you out with your grant reporting. So if you can't do it, maybe somebody else within your office can take that over and help out and make sure that the grant funds flow smoothly. But yeah, with state and federal grants, it's just, they're hoops, and they're just things that you have to expect and then anticipate even more. I don't know if you guys are sensing a theme here, but I've kind of got a little bit of a like a sports theme kind of thing going on here. But this is racing, so you know, time for a pit stop or timeout, handling staff fatigue and burnout and boredom, and you can especially in long 2-year grants or multiple 2-year grants, you can see your full-time staff getting tired and burned out, and how do you keep them energized and engaged, especially during these long grants. What worked for me before applying for long grants was to get their buy-in at the beginning, to talk to them, say, this is, you know, what I'm thinking we're going to apply for. Do you think this is going to work? And this is what's going to be expected of you. And, you know, are you okay with that? And then, you know, knowing that things go wrong and you might have to step up, and it's a 2-year commitment at least. Also, what worked for us with these long grants is that you've got performance objectives or goals, which are, you know, really long, overarching goals. What we did was we made smaller monthly goals that were in-house, that weren't necessarily part of the grant. Formally, it's just more informally that we did. And those, you know, we did like little monthly things. For example, one of the grants that we had was to process 1,700 cubic feet of backlog records. Well, we knew what we had to do in 2 years, but breaking that down by monthly goals made it much more achievable, and then we celebrated those whenever we met those goal markers. So it kind of gave them something to look forward to. And then with grant-funded employees that you hire, keeping them informed. We had monthly meetings so that they are, you know, they can communicate with the other staff members. They know what's going on. That was particularly helpful for them. And then other staff were able to help out whenever they saw a problem. And food. Food also helped out. We brought treats all the time to celebrate, to kind of keep us going. Food always is a great motivator, so that helped. Okay, I don't know how many cricket fans we have, but a sticky wicket. How do you work with boards and committees? Again, this is institutional specific, so you're going to have to work with what you've got. Sometimes you have boards already in place that you have to report to, or sometimes if you're awarded a larger grant, a substantial award, they require you to have a board or committee that helps you make decisions. And that's particularly helpful for a number of reasons, but that can also get complicated. So your position as the board chair or committee chair, you spend a lot of your time reminding them about the grant. What is it that we're doing? What are the goals? What are their duties? Because the board members or the committee members can lose track between, if it's several months between meetings. It's not a daily part of their life. You have to keep them informed before every meeting, maybe reminding them with minutes, meeting minutes, notes. We created manuals for our board members and our committee members, and then just kind of helped them keep those up to date and gave them examples of how to do timesheets and things like that, so that they didn't have to necessarily remember, because if it's not part of what they do, they're going to kind of lose interest and lose track. If you're allowed to choose your committee members, if you don't have a standing board that you have to report to, if you're allowed to choose, and sometimes those members aren't as participatory as you thought they'd be, you have to find ways to pull them in, to get them re-energized, to get them engaged. Individual phone calls, emails, and then at meeting minutes or at meetings, specifically referring to them, saying what do you think about this, or what do you want to do, or what are your thoughts on that, will help keep them engaged. And preferably to try and head off your referee roles, to try and keep it from getting hostile or anything like that. You have to keep meeting minutes on, meetings on task. Try not to allow your board members to get confrontational with one another, because with certain grants you pick members because you think that they're going to be really engaged about the topic, and sometimes they get very defensive or too engaged with the choices that they make. Maybe they're too close, and so you have to find ways to keep them on task. And then going back to the other slide, don't be afraid to take a pit stop with your boards and committees as well. Call a timeout and reconvene a meeting at a later time if it gets to be too much. You also need to keep additional names for board members and committee members in your back pocket, because sometimes they won't be what they thought. You ask them to be part of a board or committee and it takes up too much of their time, or this isn't what they thought it would be, and they pull out and they quit. And so you need to have board members in your back pocket to ask, just immediately, so that you can keep going. If you're new to grants or new to the role of being a chair on a board or a committee, there's things that you can do to kind of prep yourself for that role, perhaps working with your human resources on taking some classes or something on communication skills or people skills, and just have a lot of patience. You're going to be working with a lot of different personalities, and so patience is key. Lizette and I both had instances where we've had people who have left for one reason or another during the middle of a grant, and that's a hard one to work with. What we've come to find out is if you receive funding to hire a grant-funded person, totally anticipate that as soon as they start working for you, they are going to start looking for a new job. That's just been our experience. If it's a 2-year grant, they're going to immediately start looking because they know that they've only got 2 years and they need to start looking for a different job. With our 2-year grants, we lost our grant-funded person towards the end, and what we had to do is look at our budget and figure out what we could do, what human resources would let us do, what our granting agency would let us do. And we ended up hiring an undergrad for 3.5 months, and we classified it as a summer intern. It wasn't, ideal because they didn't have the skills that we wanted, so we had to shuffle things around and put more weight on the full-time staff. But we got through it. The next time we ended up hiring, when a person left early, we ended up hiring 2 graduate students who had just gotten done with grad school, and they were looking for experience, and we had enough money in the budget that we were able to hire 2 for 4 months. and that worked out really, really well. The other thing that we've ended up doing is asking for a no-cost grant extension. And what that means, if you're unfamiliar with that, is that you're asking your granting agency to not give you any more money, just give you more time, basically, to reach your goals and objectives, because you've had these hurdles or hoops that you've had to get through. So you're asking for, a couple more months in order to achieve your goals, because they really want you to achieve your goals. They'll work with you a lot, so you need to get a hold of them. Okay, Lizette mentioned this as well, what to do if you don't get enough applicants for your position, or you don't have enough people applying for your grant product, whether it's a workshop or a site visit, or in our case, what do you do when you have way too many? You need to, well, for those of you who don't get enough applicants for your grant-funded position, you need to work with your human resources to figure out, what you can do. Can you adjust the responsibilities within, your existing staff, kind of shift things around? Can you afford the time to advertise again? Perhaps visit with your human resources or to see what is allowed. I mean, sometimes we're not allowed to advertise certain places, but maybe visit with them and see where you can broaden your search to get the right person. Like I mentioned, we had the reverse situation where we had one position available and we had over 60 applicants, with 45 of those being completely qualified. So it's, wow, I mean, that was not what we expected to have happen. If you have too many applicants for your grant product, whether it's a workshop or a site visit, you need to evaluate and calculate within your budget and your time if you can accommodate more sites. How much is that going to cost? How much is it going to cost for your workshop presenter? The logistics involved, or if you just have to call it good and somehow, first come, first serve, or if you don't have enough, if you can scale back your workshops. If you were supposed to have 6, maybe you only have 3 or 4, and still achieve some of your goals, but modify that. It's important through all of this that you keep your grant funding agency informed. Don't wait until the very end of the grant to tell them that you had these problems, because I found that they've always had really good suggestions too, and they're really willing to help you to modify your performance objectives. So we're kind of painting a picture of gloom and doom, but not everything is bad. Sometimes you have to deal with things when you exceed your goals and expectations. You still have to find a way to address that in your grant narrative and in your grant budget. It's not a bad thing, but sometimes it kind of calls into question, how did you come up with that? What happened? In our case, like I mentioned before, we received a grant to process 1,700 cubic feet of backlog, and we processed over 2,000. So we processed 400 extra cubic feet that we didn't anticipate, and we had to explain, how that happened. It was awesome for us, but to explain how that happened. So you need to keep good documentation on your grant and just be prepared to justify the decisions that you made and the outcomes of your report. Rolling with the punches. There's no way to anticipate all the different things that are going to go wrong or go right. So how do you adjust, in this case, particularly for unexpected costs? Particularly if you have a grant that deals with hardware or software, supplies. You do your best when you're applying for your grant. You need to have hard numbers. Make sure you do a lot of math to prep for that, and be prepared. In our instance, we had a grant to digitize some materials, and our scanner, died. Our scanner died. Our scanner died in the middle of the grant, and it took us 2 months to work with our finance officer and our RT to get approval to purchase a new one. So that just really set us back, and we chose to do that, to just wait it out. We had enough money to buy another one. But that was the choice that we made, and that's what we did, and it also helped out with our match. But that might not always be the case. You might have to ask for a grant extension or modification. And the other idea that worked was working with another agency. For example, if you're a state agency who has equipment, there's maybe a state library or something like that, or a university that's close by, working with them and partnering up on them, especially if it comes to hardware, to work out some kind of agreement. That has also worked pretty well for us. Dealing with technical issues, like I mentioned, the equipment breakdowns, IT issues, canceling license agreements and starting new ones. When referring back to that scanner issue that I just mentioned, when we lost 2 months of work, we had to, it was our choice. That's what we chose to do. We had to hustle to make up for that lost production, but that worked for us, and we also called on, other staff to pick up and readjust the workload, so we made it work. Going forward, if we pursue those types of grants again, we usually end up buying 2. If we have to buy a scanner, we usually try and buy 2 so that we have a backup. We've also had issues where we've been in the middle of a grant, and the company that we had hired as a vendor for an online hosting went out of business. And so we had to pull all of our online content from them and find somebody new and get that done within the grant period. The good thing for us is that we were fairly well informed about other vendors, and so we didn't have to waste a lot of time shopping around. Other ideas for if you have situations like that are talking to your network, talking to other people within CoSA. If you've got software or some hardware, it kind of depends on what you're looking for. The PERS portal can perhaps help guide you with what products might work. With our IT staff, things that have helped us out there to kind of anticipate what we might be looking for, especially when you're trying to buy things that aren't on contract, is just working with them so that you kind of know what they look for, what things that they approve and what they don't. We have monthly meetings with our IT staff, and then we have yearly meetings with our IT staff to talk to them about upcoming ideas of things that might happen, might not happen, grants that we're applying for, equipment that we might need, so that they are always informed about what's going on. And that helps to kind of breach that continuity, because IT staff is constantly changing. So if we're meeting with them every month, we're always kind of keeping them informed, and they're getting used to our faces and kind of what we do. Big into football in my house right now, so Monday morning quarterbacks, hindsight bias. You are most likely going to be your own worst critic, and after you get done with your grant, say, oh, I wish we would have done that, or we could have done this. But in the middle of a grant, something that we didn't really anticipate was both the level of positive and to some extent the negative criticism, especially if you've got a fairly high-profile grant. So what worked for us was being prepared with press releases, Twitter, Facebook, talking points, both to handle positive criticism and negative criticism, working with friends groups, people that support us and keeping them informed, because they also spread the word about the grant and what we're doing. A lot of negativity or criticism comes from not being informed about what the grant is trying to do or who it's trying to address. So boards and committees are also an important part of this, and they can help inform people about what's going on. Especially in the case of negative criticism, you can point to websites or meeting minutes or documents that describe what you're doing, and that the board and the committees were helping to make these decisions, and that sometimes helps too. Unexpected developments that turn out to be positives in the end, but while you're trying to work through them at the time, it doesn't feel very, it's not happy. You're not excited about it. It's just something else that you had to get through. But in the end, it turns out to be a really, really good thing. During a couple of our grants, we've had to develop some policy development. We've had some policy development that has been really good. We've also had to deal with some data recovery issues and develop policy for that. You have no intention and you have no idea that some of these things are going to be happening to you, so there's no way to plan for that. But just try and sit back for a minute and try and find a way to deal with these things and reallocate staff or funding if you need to. Keep your granting agency informed. It might be extra work during the grant, but in the end, it's usually a good thing. We found a film in our backlog during one of our grants, and we got a sponsor for it, so it wasn't the grant money and it wasn't our money. We found a sponsor to pay for getting it cleaned and repaired and digitized, and we worked with our public broadcasting agency and social media, and we created this flurry about this film and how we found it, and it's part of this grant project, and we found, and it just took off and went crazy, and we found 2 other unlikely groups of people who might not have been archive supporters who in the end turned out to be really, really good supporters of us now. I have a football thing going on here, don't I? Hail Mary, last-ditch attempts to deal with blizzards, things that Lizette mentioned also. You have to have, if you live in a state like ours, you have to have a backup date and a backup date and a backup date, and also have a backup plan to that maybe you won't be able to have your in-person workshop. You're going to have to do it some other way. There's no way to plan for natural disasters. You're just going to have to reschedule, cancel completely, ask for a grant extension, or just get really creative. Have backup dates, lots of backup dates. The no lodging and food, I don't know if you guys are looking at that going, what in the world? We had a joint grant with our sister state, North Dakota, right during the middle of the oil boom, and the grant was for someone to travel. A workshop presenter was going to travel to 6 locations within both states and work with them on care of collections and, ironically enough, emergency planning. And with the oil boom, our presenter in the western part of both states could not find a place to stay and was running into issues of, food and gas and things like that because of the rush of people coming into the area to work on the oil. We got creative and solved that by, compensating and working with our workshop presenter who brought in their own RV and lived in their RV for a couple of months. So the biggest problem they had then was to find a place to park with some electricity. So you just got to get kind of creative and see what's going to work and what your grant's going to allow as far as funding, and in that case, what our workshop presenter was willing to do. Down to the wire. So your grant is almost done. You're supposed to be done, and you're not done. So what do? You can ask for a no-cost extension. Ask for modifications on your performance objectives. There again, you're just really going to have to work with your granting agency. You're going to reallocate staff and resources in order to get the grant done on time. Try and avoid getting into this position in the first place by staying on top of your numbers with monthly meetings, monthly reports with your staff to try and see if where you're at, so that you don't wait until like the very end to find out that you're not gonna meet your objectives. So, and one more. So you're done. You've met your performance objectives. You think you're done, and you're not. You still have to write that final report. You have to close out your grant. You have to work with your finance office. You have to submit everything to the granting agency. Unexpected obstacles there are working with your sub-grants, your re-grant agencies, people who are unfamiliar with grant requirements. Maybe they've never done a grant before. They're not familiar with keeping copies of everything, timesheets, receipts. Trying to work with them with phone calls and emails ahead of time, perhaps setting up a startup meeting with those organizations and with your staff, perhaps who have never done grants before as well, getting everybody trained at the onset so that you don't get into a crunch at the end. We've also found that creating checklists for both, the staff and your sub-grants, your re-granting agency, kind of keep them accountable, and just setting aside a time every month to go over everything to make sure that things are all in place. Those are ideas that worked for us, and to help keep things on target so that at the end of the grant, you've only got like a month or so before you've got to turn everything in, and you don't want to be scrambling around trying to find timesheets and receipts. So making a way to keep everybody informed and keep everybody on target really helps in the end. And that's it for me.
All right, thank you, Shelley and Lizette, for the really great information and on managing the unexpected and some of the things you've been through with grants and unexpected things. And now, excuse me, we're going to open up for questions and comments. So as we mentioned earlier, if you could use the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen, the little bubble at the top, that would be appreciated. We'll see if we've got anything here. Not seeing any, but one thing that struck me, and maybe we can talk a little bit about it, is sort of the potential for knowledge gap. And I don't know if either of you have worked that into final reporting or talking about those obstacles in your grants in the reports and things. I found that kind of interesting about the potential for knowledge gap due to personnel or other issues. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
This is Lizette. Yeah, when we are doing our reporting, we mention things that have impact. We include the unexpected things that happen, what we've learned from them, and how we might be addressing it in the next grant if there is a next grant. So we do account for that in our reporting.
I don't really have too much I don't know that I have too much to add. Like I said, we really work pretty hard on our communication with our IT and with our finance offices, and then creating strategies with our re-grants to try and keep that flow of information going. And then with a knowledge gap of staff turnover, and I've been fairly lucky there. I haven't had some of the things that Lizette has had with people passing away. That's pretty dramatic. So I've been pretty lucky there that most of my staff has been here for a while. So there's a little bit of continuity there. But yeah, we work pretty hard on our communication skills so that everybody's on the same page.
So we do have a question directed towards Shelley about how easy was it to set up meetings with IT, and how easy was that to do?
There again, I think we were lucky. It was pretty easy for us to do. I have a specific point of contact person in our IT who works just with our agency, and so I meet with her and every month, plus a couple of other people, and then and we've got a standing monthly meeting. It happens, you know, on the same day every month, and then, you know, that really helped. Once we got the ball going, when I explained to them, you know, it'd just be easier if you know, if I know what you guys are expecting and how you guys work and what you're going to be most likely looking for in software and hardware, then I won't be, you know, it's a two-way street. Once we got that going, it's been a really good relationship. And then the yearly meeting that we have in February, every February, is a much bigger, it's usually about me and one other staff person from my staff, and it's about 10 IT staff. And it's just to kind of let them know on both ends what they're looking at and what we're looking at going forward, and it's been very helpful.
We haven't done any grants recently that have involved software purchases or installation of hardware or systems, but we are working, the archive staff is working on that. And I know our IT has been coming to me and saying, you know, we really need to be on board earlier than later. So I know now that should we ever write a grant that would involve that they would be willing and to be involved earlier on in the process. So I don't envision any problems with them. But again, it depends on personalities too. You know, the people who are here now are interested. Who knows in the future if we had a grant and what staff was here.
All right. Thank you. Seeing that we're getting close on time here, I'm going to pass it back over to Barbara to talk about some upcoming announcements and events and to wrap up. So pass it over to you, Barbara.
Thanks very much, Alan, and thanks, Lizette and Chelle, for those great presentations. If you all are interested in hearing more from Chelle and Lizette and having a more informal conversation about managing unexpected issues and grants, please join us next Thursday for our Learning Lab conference call. You don't really have to pre-register. You just call on our CoSA conference line, and we'll just have an open conversation for an hour. You can ask questions. You may have some of your horror stories and successes to share as well, so please join us for that. We also have an upcoming webinar, which is a new series of webinars that we're going to sponsor with CoSA's corporate sponsors. And our first webinar is going to be Tuesday, November 14th with Family Search. So please join us for Shop Talk. We'll be sending out some more information about that as we get a little bit more organized about it. So stay tuned for some details via email and on our website. Also, we wanted to let you know that the Education and Training Committee is planning the 2018 webinar series around the theme of leadership and management, which is something that many of the members have requested over the past year in the evaluations and in other surveys that we've done. So look for some more information on that soon. It will be another year of informative webinars. And thanks again to this committee this year for planning these 2017 grant management webinars. I think they've all been really good, and if you haven't heard all of them or if you'd like to revisit, you can see CoSA's YouTube channel to see the webinars from this year and also from past years. We have a few events that are coming up where we hope to see many of you in Boston in a couple of weeks for the Best Practices Exchange. Veronica Martzel from the Massachusetts Archives and her steering committee, or unsteering committee I believe it's called, have planned a great program for us, so please join us there. Hope to see many of you. Also, a very important deadline is November 15th. The program proposal submissions are due for the 2018 joint annual meeting with CoSA, NAGARA, and SAA in Washington, D.C. in August. So please submit those. We're looking forward to seeing a lot of submissions from CoSA members as well as from other members around the profession. If you have any questions about that, you can contact one of the CoSA staff and we'll help you, or Lisa Spear, the Arkansas State Archivist, is CoSA's Program Committee Co-Chair. And the CoSA board meeting is coming up in April. Also, thanks to CoSA's corporate sponsors. I won't take the time to read all of them because we're a little bit behind, but we have so many great sponsors who help CoSA with programming and publications and webinars. I would like to point out the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which just awarded CoSA a grant of over $200,000 to work with collaborators and other associations for the next couple of years to work on electronic records issues, so we're very happy to have that grant. And there are many ways that you can stay connected with CoSA through our website, social media, email, so please let us know if there's anything you need from CoSA or if you have any questions about today or any other issues. And we really do appreciate you joining our webinar today. If you take a few minutes to help us evaluate today's webinar and to give us feedback on future webinar topics, we would really appreciate it so much. This is the last of CoSA's member webinars for the year, so it's really important for us to hear from you as we plan the 2018 webinars. And thanks again to our speakers for such outstanding presentations, and thanks to Tim for recognizing Ann Ackerson and her dedication to CoSA. So please complete the evaluation. When you sign off, you'll be taken to an evaluation page, and it won't take you very long, and we really look forward to seeing what you have to say. And thanks for joining us today, and thanks again to Alan, Tim, Lizette, and Shelley for helping us out. Bye, everyone.
Bye.